Good day and welcome to today's conversation podcast, where we've decided to have a special program about the state of our country. And I've brought back Mr. John Sagwa, State Counsel, to help me discuss these matters. Mr. Sagwa, I promised that I'll bring you back for a special program, and I'd stated that you'll be a regular analyst on matters that rise where we may require your input.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. The Oasis Forum recently relaunched. The Zambian people may remember the Oasis Forum comprising the Law Association of Zambia, NGOCC, the three church mother bodies. At the time, I think it was the Zambia Episcopal Conference, the Evangelical Fellowship of Zambia, and the Christian churches, the Christian Council of Churches in Zambia. They were put together to protest against perceived changes that were to take place to facilitate Dr. Chiluba's then, our second president, return through a third term and through constitutional amendment. So they were very instrumental in coordinating dissent and coordinating opposition of the constitutional amendments because they thought it was personal, selfish, and also raised other matters, governance matters, and they became a very strong voice in our country. But over the years, they petered out. They are back. They announced last week that they're back, and they are saying, number one, they want to ensure that the new constitutional making process is inclusive, is people-driven, and allows all stakeholders. Secondly, they're worried about the state of our country. They are worried about governance and governance issues and how we are proceeding. Thirdly, they're worried about the rule of law. So I've brought you, these are constitutional matters. You have a long history in these matters, and I thought we could begin from there. We need a new constitution.
No, you don't. The issues they are talking about, I think, is what has caused problems in this country, in the sense that sometimes we choose not to grow. Okay, we continue to talk about the same things and so forth, But as a country, you have to get worried when civil society is now beginning to behave like politicians, because politicians rarely grow anyway. But civil society has to move with the time. If you ask me, do we need a new constitution? The answer is that no, we don't need a new constitution. And there's a reason for that. Previous presidents, starting with Dr. Chiluba up to Sata, they had the reason to advocate for a new constitution. If I may just go back into history, just slightly, but it's always important to have reference to history, because you can't discuss the present without reference to the past. Now, in 1991, when we made a transition from one-party state to a multi-party state, there was a general understanding that we needed a new constitution, because you're talking about different political systems, one-party system, and now you have accepted to have a multi-party system. So a one-party constitution cannot support a multi-party system of government. And the other point to also recognize is that you don't just wake up one morning to say, we need a new constitution. No, you don't. Constitution making is something that is done at certain historical times. It's not something that you do every day. I've read a statement where they say there is need for a new roadmap. Now, first of all, who told them that the country needs a new constitution? How did they arrive at the decision that there is need for a new roadmap?
Mr. Sagwa, they've arrived at that. I think they've seen the maneuvers from the executive As soon as the Minister of Justice, Mulambe Aimbe, was appointed, he said he was setting up a technical team at the Ministry of Justice to look into the issues that may require constitutional amendments. There have been movements in Parliament. The Speaker wrote to members of Parliament and stated that she wanted them to propose what she termed non-contentious issues for possible amendments. Many of us, I think even including you, oppose that because the Parliament is a creature. It can't begin to create itself.
Yeah.
And then there have been subsequent statements from the Ministry of Justice and Honorable Mulambe Aimbe in particular, where he keeps on talking about the progress they are making on the need for a new constitution.
Yeah.
So coming from that place where the public pronouncements and where Parliament has attempted also to inform the MPs that there may be amendments to non-contentious issues and even invite them to propose their own.
Yeah.
This must alarm you too. And
They do. Yes, of course they do. But the point is that, first of all, there are two different issues that we have to discuss. But there is amendment of the Constitution and there is a making of a new Constitution. Those are two different processes altogether. Okay? Now, the process of amending the Constitution is the responsibility of Parliament. Okay? The process of making a new Constitution is not the responsibility of Parliament. It is the responsibility of the people. Okay? Now, those that are talking about a roadmap, if you want to make a new Constitution, there is already a roadmap under the current Constitution.
Oh, what's a roadmap?
You know, this is where sometimes people don't read.
Yeah.
Okay? The Constitution, as amended in 2016, clearly sets out in Article 5, I think Article 5.4, not only does it talk about the amendment of the Constitution, it also talks about issues that are exclusively reserved for the people. Okay? So, in Article 5, the Constitution proceeds on the premise that the ultimate authority in this country reserves collectively in the Zambian people. But this authority has been delegated to various bodies. For example, the responsibility of Parliament is to make laws. The responsibility of the executive branch of government is, for example, is to govern the country by formulating policies and implementing them. Then you have the responsibility of the judiciary, which is to adjudicate. So power is already divided. That is what the Constitution does. And power has also been vested in various other institutional bodies. Then the Constitution provides that power, which has not been expressly vested in any institution, that power is reserved to the people. Okay? So power, the residue, what has not been given, the residue rests with the people. And how are the people to exercise this? It is through a referendum. And that referendum has to be provided for. Now, if you check the Constitution, nowhere does the Constitution provide for constitutional making. The Constitution does not provide for constitutional making, but it provides for its amendment. If you are talking about amendment of the Constitution, you make reference to Article 79. It is very clear on the procedure to follow for the amendment of the Constitution. But for constitution making, that is not provided for. That is the residue. That authority is not vested in a political party. That power is vested collectively in us. And the only way we can exercise that power is through a referendum. So that is already provided for. So you do not need a roadmap. I don't know what they even mean by a roadmap, because it is very clear. If you have to make a new constitution, you have to, the process has to be prescribed in an act of parliament, and that act of parliament should provide for a referendum at the end of the day, so that the citizens have a say But there is another reason why this particular discussion is basically redundant. Okay, in the sense that, first of all, you don't undertake these discussions in a vacuum. If I may ask you, Ambassador, what is the most pressing need of a Zambian today?
Economic issues.
Exactly. Who is interested in the Constitution? Who? First of all, even when you advocate for an issue, you don't do it in a vacuum. And that is why constitution making, constitutional amendment is taken at a certain periodical time when people are focusing on that. In fact, in my view, it is even irresponsible to talk about constitution making or even constitutional amendment for a country that just lost nearly 1,000 people from cholera not long ago, for a country that is right now facing serious issues of drought, where some of the citizens cannot even afford to eat. People are looking for the staple food. And then you have a president who says you should try cassava meal.
Flash their candle. The previous government was spent for proposing candle.
It stays mainly in the army. But again, all these are irresponsible statements, but it goes to show how misguided the priorities are. And most importantly, this is a broke country. The country is broke. We have just gone through the process of debt restructuring. Now, any responsible country that is in a position of Zambia is to have its priorities set correctly. Okay, there are these pressing issues to deal with debt, meaning that whatever resources you have to spend them responsibly. If you are talking about constitution making, that it will involve money. Where is that money going to come from? Because you're broke as a country. So I think it is important to be able to look at the fact that, first of all, we don't need a new constitution, okay, because that constitution was, because the constitution making process, Ambassador, we completed that exercise in 2016. Okay? We struggled from 1991 trying to make a constitution. That process ended in 2016. We may not like where we ended, but unfortunately, that is where we ended. Let me just explain a little bit.
Yeah.
Why do I say it ended in 2016? It's very simple. 1991, when we made a transition from one-party rule to multi-party, we had the 1991 Constitution. Now, that Constitution was a compromise Constitution because the original text was determined by UNIP alone, and MMD threatened to boycott the election of 1991. So as a compromise, we had that Constitution of 1991. Then the general understanding was, after the election, in the event that MMD wins, we'll embark on a new constitution-making exercise because the 1991 was a compromise. And you remember it took 3 years for President Chilwa to appoint the Manakato Constitution Commission. The mandate of the commission was very clear, come up with a new constitution. But halfway through, that process was aborted. It resulted in the amendment of the constitution of 1996. And some of the controversial clauses like banning Kaunda from contesting. That process of making a new constitution was aborted in 1996. When President Mwanawasa came to office, he said, no, we didn't finish that process. We need a new process. That is how President Mwanawasa appointed the Mungomba Constitution Commission. Mungomba provided its report in 2005, and that report, Mwanawasa decided to say it should go to the Constitutional Conference, if you remember.
There was a part of the Constituent Assembly.
But President Mwanawasa decided, no, we don't need a Constituent Assembly, we needed a Constitutional Conference. The draft Constitution was taken to the Constitutional Conference, and it came up. And unfortunately, Mwanawasa died in 2008. Then that was carried over by President
Rupia Banda. Yes.
That process collapsed
in Parliament.
When President Sata came into office, it simply said, oh, that process, we didn't complete it. That's when in 2012, he appointed a technical committee. He didn't appoint a commission, but he appointed a technical committee because they said, listen, there is already enough material for us to come up with a good constitution. And that is how they put together that technical committee. Technical committee's first order of business was to draft a fresh constitution based on the materials that had already been generated over the years. If you look at the draft constitution that came up, that the technical committee came up with, was the most widely debated instrument than any other previous draft constitution. Because that technical committee they created what they were calling district assemblies, provincial assemblies, where these draft constitutions were actually discussed in all the provinces. Based on the response from the provinces and from the districts, because discussion from the district were elevated to the provinces. Then the provinces were now sent their comments. If you read the technical committee's report, it is very clear about what was said in each particular province or district on each and every clause. Based on those responses, we now came up with a final text of the Constitution. But as you know, when President Sata died, the process died a little bit. Then when we came close to the 2016 election, you remember the constitution making became an issue. Where the current president said, when I'm elected, I'm going to put in a new constitution. When President Lungu was already president, said, me, I'm not promising, I will do it. Okay? And that's how everything was revived. Then, if you remember, Dr. Simbiakula was the Minister of Justice. He now said, okay, we picked up that draft constitution, which had been prepared by the technical committee. He said, okay. And if you remember, there was discussion where UPND was demanding that the next election should be held not on a first past the post system, but on 50 plus 1. To achieve that, you needed to amend the constitution before the 2016 election. So, Dr. Simbiakula decided that we are going to introduce this constitution in 2 phases. The first phase involved all the provisions that were non-entrenched. Now, so they've split them into 2. The entrenched provision were now to be subjected to a referendum which was going to coincide with the election of 2016. This is how parties agreed. Now, if you look at the composition of the
You're speaking to an ordinary audience. When you say clauses that are entrenched, what does that mean?
Okay. There are clauses that are entrenched, meaning that, first of all, to amend the constitution, you need 2/3 majority, 2/3 for the members of parliament. Okay, not even those attending, whether but just look at the number. If it is 150 that time, you needed 2/3 for the bill to pass. For the entrenched provision, in addition, you needed to take it to a referendum. That is how the constitution, parts of the constitution are structured. Some can be amended with a 2/3 majority
in parliament.
Others, like the Bill of Rights and Article 79 itself, you needed a referendum in addition to that. So you can get your 2/3, the referendum, meaning that the people have to participate. If the referendum does not pass, then the whole thing dies. So I would urge those that are interested, take the parliamentary debates of December 2015. You will find that there is very extensive debate between, now remember, PF did not have a 2/3 majority. So it needed the support of UPND. You will find that there is a debate on most of the clauses between UPND MPs and MPs. Whatever clauses that some clauses were actually rejected jointly. For example, the original text of the draft constitution provided to say that the president should be able to appoint cabinet
from outside Parliament.
Both UPND and PF rejected that. There was an issue of proportional representation. Okay? That measure was equally rejected by both PF and PND. So the final instrument that President Lungu signed on the 5th of January 2016 was a bipartisan document supported by both UPND and PF. Now, Ambassador, if you have a byproduct, a bipartisan product, what reason then do you have to amend it? This is the same reason that we oppose Bill 10. The same reasons we oppose Bill 10 are the same reasons that we have to oppose any attempt to amend the Constitution by UPND, because that is a bipartisan instrument. No single political party can claim ownership of that amendment of the Constitution in 2016. That was a bipartisan product. Now, you cannot therefore, because you are in power today, you want to change because it suits you. No, because that was what came out. Now, for part 2, which involved the Bill of Rights.
Part 3.
No, part 2 now, but the second part of the amendment of the Constitution.
Oh, okay, yes.
I was one of the few lawyers who went around there, I think, around Lusaka, to try and on various platforms, trying to advocate, encourage people to vote yes in favor of the bill. UPND
supposedly, after supporting it in Parliament,
yes,
because it didn't have the 2/3 majority, passing it in Parliament, in their official campaign, campaigned against
the adoption of the Bill of Rights.
But which referendum failed.
That referendum failed. When it failed, that was the choice of the people. Okay? Because a referendum can either pass or fail. And in this case, it failed. End of story. So which means we have the Constitution as amended in 2016 plus the Bill of Rights that has been there from 1991. It is the way it is. That is the choice of the people. That is what we must respect. Now, you don't...
There is talk, Mr. Sagwa.
Yes.
But, we are laymen, but they tell us that there are many lacunas, there are many inconsistencies in the constitutions, the current constitution, there are many inadequacies. The very argument, I think, that fostered Bill 10 and the very reason that drove the amendments of Bill 10 was that the constitution was not inclusive and it had many lacunas and it was contradicting itself. How do you respond to this as basis for a new constitution?
Those are crazy ideas. These were fictions conceived by the PF, okay, as a prelude to Bill 10. Okay? But even when they say, first of all, there's no word called lacunas. Okay?
Educate us.
Yes, there's no word called lacunas. Okay? Lacuna is singular. Plural is lacunae.
Okay? An E at the
an E, an S.
So it's a Latin word.
Yes. So, what is a lacuna? Lacuna is a gap. Now, you have looked at that instrument. Do you see gaps there? There are no gaps. The articles run in sequence. When you are talking about a lacuna, you are basically saying, listen, maybe the article jumps from article 10, it goes to 12. But where is article 11 here? It doesn't make sense. Then you say there is a gap because article 11 is missing. Those are gaps. That's what is meant by lacuna. Now, there is no such a thing as gaps. These are provisions, for example, people which don't like. You begin to attack them. But the Constitution is not there to please people. There are certain provisions I may not like. There are certain provisions you may not like. That is the essence of rule of law. You have to accept the law as it is, not as you think it ought to be. The moment you begin to think about the law as it ought to be, that is a recipe of lawlessness.
There is a matter where politicians from both aisles, I think for their selfish interests appear to agree. For example, the delimitation process, that we need more delimitation process, more members of parliament. This falls in what they are calling non-contentious issues. Do you think there are non-contentious issues that need amendment in parliament?
Ambassador, when you say non-contentious, where are you coming from?
Yeah.
There has to be a reference point. Okay, from what perspective? What makes it contentious or not non-contentious? Such a thing as non-contentious process. Based on who? What is your reference point? You have to have a reference point on the basis of which you conclude this is non-contentious and this is contentious. Decides that. Okay? These are crazy ideas that you hear about, and you just wonder, what kind of education do these people get? You take the law as it is. Now, going back to the issue of what you're talking about, Kunai or whatever, there is a point. The drafters of the Constitution recognize the fact that no Constitution is ever perfect, because it is drafted by human beings, right? Then what do? We have created a special code, which is the Constitutional Code. We have a problem. You and I have a dispute. What do? We go to this court. If we think something doesn't make sense, it is not for you as a politician to make that determination. You go to court, and the court will have to agree with you whether there is a conflict or not. Through the process of interpretation, the court will harmonize those provisions. And what the court will guide us. That is why we have a constitutional court. And that is why those judges, ideally, the rationale is that they should have serious training in matters of the Constitution. That's a different matter.
Yeah.
That is now a manpower problem. But there are mechanisms within the Constitution for it to address its own inadequacies. Okay, for example.
So the so-called lacunas, inadequacies, and provision that are not speaking to one another can be resolved, in your view, by the Constitutional Court.
Here we can read the same provision. I can disagree with you, and you can disagree with me. Okay, but do I have then the right to tell you this is wrong? If that right. The moment I assume that right, that is lawlessness, because the Constitution says this Constitution is binding on each and every one of us. Okay? I have no right to say, I agree with this or I disagree. No. Whether I like it or not, it is the law, and I'm bound by what the Constitution says.
This brings me to another issue. There was this heated debate over Bill 10.
Yes.
You opposed it,
yes.
And many opposed it. The UPND also opposed the amendments of the Constitution.
Yes.
But as soon as they came to power, they said, no, we may need to amend the Constitution. In fact, from the debate, they appear that they may lift the same clause or some of the clauses from Bill 10 as proposals to amend the Constitution. You may have opposed the Bill 10, I think for different reasons than other stakeholders. Because for you, I think you are saying, let's test the constitutions. If there are gaps, let's go to the Constitutional Court. I don't think that the process should be through amendments or through a new constitution.
That's the indecency of politicians. Okay, there is need for consistency. Okay, if for some reason they believe that certain provisions were problematic, why didn't they say so during the time of Bill 10? They didn't. Okay, and the entire Bill 10 collapsed thanks to UPND members who did not support it. Therefore, they couldn't get the 2/3 majority required. Now, how can, after you have opposed the bill in one instance, 3 years later, you want to come back as actually there is a priority? How can it be a priority? This is the indecency of the politicians that we talk. There has to be consistency. I have maintained my position. This Constitution that we have as amended in 2016 is the best instrument we have ever had in the history of this country. It is not perfect, but it is the best.
Far better.
It is far better than where we have come from. If civil society, the Oasis Forum, if they have money from donors to spend, that money should be spent on civic education.
Of the Constitution.
Of the Constitution. They should undertake an exercise to educate people on the Constitution and what it provides. Because I can bet you, I don't think any of those cabinet ministers even understand what the Constitution provides. And this is the problem we have. I don't think any of the members of parliament have ever read the Constitution. This is the instrument they swear to defend and protect. They take oath. Now, they take oath.
What are some of the good provisions in these 2016 elections? Because maybe we're just speaking on what we seem are bad ones. What do you think? Where have we made progress?
We have made significant progress. First of all, I've just talked about Article 5, right?
Yeah.
Which now says power that is not vested in a specific individual rests with the people. But that has never been there in the previous constitution. Okay? Those are the issues we should be able to embrace. There's for other provision. For instance, I'll tell you, there is as part of civic education, what we should be talking about is to actualize some provisions of the Constitution. For example, one of the benefits that exists now, right, which has helped PF remain intact, is in the Constitution.
Explain.
Well, there is a provision in the Constitution which says that if you resign
as a member of
parliament, you will not be allowed to contest. Okay? You have to wait until the next cycle.
So the opportunistic MPs that may wish to cross to UPND, and they mostly, if they cross the floor or resign, they may not be eligible until after 5 years.
Eligible.
They are not.
They are not. You can't force a by-election. And then at the end of you cross the floor.
And you participate.
And you won't qualify to participate. That's why PF has remained intact. There is no incentive to cross over. Because first of all, you've already
because of the laws.
Yes. I've already chewed your gratuity in advance.
Yeah.
Now you want to cross over. Unless previously the crossing over was okay because you could cross over
and still stand and return.
Like for example, you can cross over if you are PF, you can cross over to UPND, and UPND can adopt you. You recontest your seat and win. That provision is no longer there. You resign, that seat you are done. You don't
cross the by-election.
Yes, you can't take part. So there is no incentive for people to cross over. That's why up to this day, PF has remained intact.
Largely due to that
provision. That is progress. That is consolidating your democracy.
Oh, you are right. We may get many things for granted. For example, the election date was not previously prescribed.
Exactly.
Now it is prescribed.
Now it is. That takes me to another point. I've heard people say we can go for an early election.
Oh, now that's a big test. That's a big thought because before you come in, explain. I've just not got for any election. So I want to use the opportunity to educate me too. There's been a clear thought. Looking at the 3 years of President Hakainde Hichilema, looking at his economic policies and the state of the country, clearly has sunk us in a hole that can get us out.
True.
There is a comparison to 1990 where clearly Hakainde had failed. He had tried all the tricks from the books and he had failed.
Yes.
Hakainde Hichilema is being compared to the same, looking at the state of the country, his proposed solutions. People don't see the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. They've called for early elections, saying it's not possible from the provision of the Constitution. Exactly. You know, if I try to educate me and educate my audience,
it can't happen. Okay? It can't happen. It's impossible. Whether you like HH or you don't, you are stuck with him for the remainder of his term. Until 2016. Until 2026. We are stuck with that. Okay? Why? Because the Constitution now, what is interesting, and people don't respect this document. Most of the clauses in the Constitution have historical background. When President Mwanawasa was in office, there was an amendment to the Electoral Act. What used to happen is that although the constitution say you'll have general election every 5 years, the date of election was invariably set by the president. So the president of the ruling party, they would make all the arrangements
in advance.
And then surprise the opposition. That provision has now been taken away. The constitution says every 5 years, on a Thursday of, should be, I think, August, second Thursday of August, every 5 years, there should be a general election. It's no longer a preserve of the president to state the election then. It is set by the constitution. So, for example, we can even check the calendar right now and identify the day
Zambia will go to elections
in 2026. Even in 2031, even 100 years later, we can tell which exact date of the week we're going to have elections. So the power has been taken away. Now, I've had all these things. I mean, I've had people come to us and say, what happens if all the 12 members of parliament resign from parliament? What happens? Will there be an early election? No, there won't be an early election. They resign, they quit, there'll be by-elections. Okay, there'll be by-elections which you probably may even win. And what happens? You bury PF. You cannot have an early election.
Okay. So if President Hakainde Hichilema responds to this pressure where he can't see that he will resolve the economic crisis of our country and other crises of our country, and says, I resign, I call for early election, what does the constitution say?
He can't. It will be an illegal move. Doesn't have power to do that. If he says he has failed, right, he resigns and the vice president takes over for the remainder of the time.
Well, that's why the vice president is running with. He's elected by the people.
Exactly.
And they don't that there's vacancy in the presidency by death, resignation, incapacity, or any other. The vice president takes over.
Until 2026, you don't have an early election. Okay? The only instance when the president you can go for an early election, it is where the president this is in Article 81, by the way, where he can show that Parliament is not able to play ball with him. For example, if he is not able to pass legislation. For instance, if that would happen, for instance, if at all the National Assembly is controlled by the opposition.
Or say hung parliament.
Yes, so that they make it difficult for him to govern. In that situation, he can go for the dissolution of the National Assembly and go for another election. But that measure, it's subject to, it has to be taken to the Constitutional Court. It's not automatic. Determination. Is it true that indeed you cannot govern? Is it true that the National Assembly has made your life difficult as president? It is up to the Constitutional Court to confirm whether indeed that is the position. If that is the position, they agree with the president, then the National Assembly is dissolved, we go for early election. Okay.
Wow. I think you have educated both us and the UPND. If UPND had that thought, they would have shut us up and would have said, what you're proposing is not even within the law.
That is why I am saying, forget about the roadmap, forget about amendment, educate yourself on the Constitution. This is the problem we have. For example, you have a president who wakes up and says, oh, he employed those nurses who assisted at Independence Stadium. He says, but how? That's not the job of the president. It's not.
It may be popular, but it may not be legal.
Because that's not the response. That's not how government works, Ambassador. You have worked in government.
Yes.
You don't just employ people anyhow. Okay? Now, and the president can't just formulate policies as he's working. He makes a pronouncement, boom, it becomes policy. No. This formulation is the responsibility of cabinet. Okay?
Yeah.
This is the extent of lawlessness we are in. That's why we have so many problems. We don't follow the law. We don't respect the law. Everything is laid down. Okay? For example, Ambassador, we have a problem to do with the relationship between central government and local government. Now, first of all, central government doesn't respect the function of local authorities. Don't. And that is why you have so many problems. Now, for instance, and even when you look at all these things, I don't think they even understand that the power to govern district is exclusively vested in the district councils and municipal councils. If they know, they don't respect it. Yeah. Okay? The job of the central government is to ensure that local authorities are adequately funded. Because even the idea where you have is it the CDF vehicles?
Yeah. And police vehicles bought by Ministry of Local Government on behalf of local authorities. How? Funding is withheld when determination is made that you need a police vehicle. You need an ambulance. Now you need
business ambassador.
You need a monitoring and evaluation vehicle.
How? The needs of local authorities are different. Okay, they're different. The responsibility of the central government is to give money to these local authorities, decide themselves what
their own budgets and how
priorities are. Okay, some will tell you that we don't need a vehicle. Okay, our biggest priority may be this or maybe that, or sort out the water system. For example, something very basic, licensing of motor vehicles. You know that's the responsibility of local authorities.
Oh,
yes, based on the Constitution.
That's what are doing there.
Shouldn't be there. These are things that should be changed to harmonize with the Constitution. Vehicle licensing is a responsibility of local authorities.
As a mechanism for local revenue.
Local revenue, and they understand the dynamics better. Okay? So that if you are a district, you have more vehicles, it means more damage to your roads. And for that reason, you should be able to collect more revenue from vehicle licensing. Vehicle licensing should not go to the central government, or should not even go to
emergency.
That is supposed to be the money is also funding for the local authority. We haven't read these things.
Wow.
Okay? There are many things in the Constitution which people have not read. Just like I was explaining about this notion that you can have an early election in Zambia. You can't have an early election. That is what, if I thought there is a relaunch of the Oasis Forum, what they should do is to carry out civic education.
Yeah.
For example, there is another provision in the Constitution, for example. We have been talking about poverty in these areas.
Yeah.
Let's take Northwestern Province. All these areas where these mines, big mines, are operating, those areas are owned by chiefs. Okay? Now, how much of the revenue being generated from these mines actually going to the local people? And yet, the Constitution addresses that. Okay? In Article 168, the government is supposed to pass legislation which will provide for how the utilization of the resources in these areas is supposed to be managed. If I may just read it, it says, the role of a chief in the management, control, sharing of natural and other resources in the chiefdom shall be prescribed.
Wow. There's supposed to be a profit-sharing mechanism of the resources that are being harvested from these local areas, from these traditional
practices. What should be passed? That is what the Oasis Forum should be advocating for. To say, can we make sure that these chiefs, where resources, wealth is being generated from their chiefdoms, there is a mechanism for them to benefit. And that is why you see wealth being generated, but these people still remain poor. Okay? Now, there are many provisions in the Constitution. Such a law has never been passed. That's what we should be
prescribed in the subsidiary
to provide for such a mechanism. And if there is, we should be able to see how it is implemented. Now, these investors, you know what they can do? They can close up today, pack up and go.
because your investment policy says you employ people and pay their taxes.
Yes.
And pay as you earn, and that's your duty.
Yeah.
The duty of development is up to your government. You pay tax, and your government must bring development.
Exactly.
That is why you see some of the richest wealth in our country are poor.
Yes.
Because the investor says, "Look, I pay taxes to a central government." And I was not personally aware that there's now provision for mechanisms for sharing of that resources.
Why should, for example, I'll give you an example. I grew up in Muflira.
Yeah.
Now, they will tell you that Muflira produces the best copper in the world,
Yeah.
which fetches a premium. Now, you go to Muflira today, Muflira looks like a war zone.
Yeah.
There has never been any serious investment in Muflira since 1964.
But for center,
Yes. Exactly. But the point is that this is the world where the wealth is being generated. Now, money we should be talking about, and even all those MPs and councillors, those are the issues we should be talking about. How do we make sure that wealth that is generated for areas actually benefits the people? Now, even your local authorities, instead of sharing blocks and so forth, those are the issues they should be talking about. How do we make sure? If a district doesn't have natural resources, it's different. It becomes a contradiction and immoral for a district to have so much wealth and yet remain so poor. Okay? That is completely unacceptable. But the Constitution addresses that. These are the issues we should be talking about. How do we actualize this? Another provision that we're talking about, for example, there's a requirement in the Constitution to regulate political parties and regulate the funding of political parties.
Article 60.
Yes. No law has ever been passed. Okay? As a result, our election, although we celebrate it to say it's a democratic election, no, it's actually it's like a fight between people with money. And this money comes from outside the country. And that distorts the quality of our democracy. There should be legislation to regulate how much money you put in an election. And from where? You have to disclose that. Okay? Your UPF did not pass such legislation. And if UPND is truly committed to constitutional rule, that should be the law to pass. And if Oasis Forum have time and money to campaign for anything, those are the measures they should be advocating for, not coming up with a roadmap and so forth. No, we don't need a roadmap. First of all, Ambassador, why would you change a constitution which you don't even understand in the first place?
Yeah, true. No, from what you explained, like your consistent argument, you've said, let's test this constitution.
Yes.
Let it run its phase. The United States, I think, which has been in existence over 200 years, has fewer than, I think, 10 amendments.
Yes.
We have more frequent amendments in the last 60 years than, many constitutions.
As Ambassador, we have been going far. Botswana has had the same constitution since 1966.
Wow.
Okay? Of course, it has been amended here and there, but they have never thrown anything out. They have amended it. If you look at Botswana, it's a far more prosperous country than Zambia, and it's even better governed than Zambia. And we had similar constitutions. Okay? So you cannot rush into attacking a document before you attack it. Do you understand it first? You must first understand it. You now come up with this fiction, lacuna. There's no lacuna. You have an issue, go to the Constitutional Court. And we have to avoid this situation where it has become a tradition. Every government that comes in, we have to initiate a constitutional making process. Crazy and completely irresponsible to do that. It is even worse when such an idea is being propagated by civil society. It is completely irresponsible. Civil society should be able to defend the Constitution as it is, hold government accountable. Okay, so these ideas of trying to come up with it's completely irresponsible and crazy. And in any case, it's not. Even if we wanted to, it's not a priority.
I see. I see.
Priorities first of all to survive. After all, you have already declared what
State of emergency.
yes. Where you are now expecting people to help you feed your people. We're talking about the possibility of millions of people starving.
About 6 million.
Yes. Now you want to talk about a roadmap to a for constitutional making? Clearly, you're not serious. Okay? The attention should be, how do we survive this drought with minimal impact, with as fewer people as possible being exposed to starvation? That should be the conversation in the country. The roadmap for a new constitution making. Responsible.
And take reprimand on behalf. Other issues that they raised, the issues of governance and the issues of the rule of law. I think it's now established that there are concerns around the democratic space, that the democratic space is really shrinking and shrinking quickly. You have an inspector general of police that literally has suspended civil and political rights. Position, if we've ever had public meetings and public processions from 2021. The other things the Inspector General of Police is doing, for example, he says the members of the police that were hired during the period of 10 years under the Patriotic Front, he says he has begun the purge to remove them.
But the junkies.
He calls them junkies. His own police officers who dragged him and drive him to his house. He says they're a set of junkies. But there are other concerns in the state of the rule of law, where from the president down to the lower organs, where they don't appear to respect the rule of law. It appears to be the rule of man. What do you say to those issues? Before we transition to the other topic, I thought you could.
It's a problem. But you see, and this is at least, it's a reminder to the voters. Okay, be careful you vote for. That's what it amounts to. Okay, first of all, you need to look at, again, we get so excited during the election time. We look at how a person has lived his life. Has he been one who has respected the law or not? Now, once he has a history of not respecting the law, you give him power, you become worse. If he's been a dealer all his life, you give him power. Once he assumes the presidency or he becomes a member of parliament or a councillor, you do more deals. Okay? These are things that we have to watch out for. Now, if somebody has always been a criminal, you give him power, you even commit more crimes. If somebody has been a good person all his life, you give him power, even becomes a better human being in the process. And you do good, not because the law says he should do good, but because it's in his nature. The point is that, yes, there is a problem. You have an Inspector General of Police. First of all, they have misapplied the Public Order Act. The Public Order Act has been misapplied. You do not need permission to hold a public rally, to have a public gathering. You don't. Your job is simply to inform the police. It's the only legal requirement. Okay? Now, before the repeal, the case of Christine Mlundika case, you required a license, a permit to hold a public gathering. The Supreme Court struck that down to say you do not need that. What you need to do in order to maintain law and order is to inform the police. And the contradiction, why is that? You simply inform them so that they can make adequate arrangements in the event that there is breakdown of law and order. Okay? Here is the stupidity of it all. You have no people to deploy to secure law and order, but you have enough policemen to go and chase
those that wish to gather.
I mean, how crazy can that be? That is lawlessness.
We've allowed the policemen to behave as if the Public Order Act is as it was in 1998 before the amendment.
Yes, and this is
because they say we've refused you permit or we've refused you notice. People refuse a notice.
A notice. It's simply a notice. I'm informing you. This is what I intend to do. And the most logical thing, if they were working genuinely, And what they could do is that, okay, can you ensure that ABCD is put in place? You can go ahead. Okay. Or
when it provides for marshals.
exactly. So, okay, fine. Go ahead. But what we'll do is that we can only spare you 10 police officers. Can you make sure that you look for other people that can work together with the police officers to ensure there's no breakdown of law and order? Okay? Because I don't think at all the people who want to have rallies, they want to cause anarchy. No. Okay? It's just to ensure that there is order in the way the rallies are conducted. But also, the way these people apply the law is as though it is based on the assumption free rally will result in violence. There is no data to support that. Okay? So, but the sad part is that even if you look at the UPND manifesto, they clearly stated we will make sure the Public Order Act is properly enforced, correctly enforced in their own manifesto. You take time to read it. They recognized that the Public Order Act was being misapplied, was being abused. It was being abused by PF. And they promised that they'll be able to, the fact their commitment is that it's actually to repeal it. But before they repeal, they said, we'll make sure that it is applies as it should be. What we are now seeing is even worse form of application, misapplication, than what was under the PF. Okay.
There's another matter of concern to me and to many people advocates of freedom of expression and freedom of the press like you. The arrests. First, our celebration that the president had repealed criminal defamation of the president. Our celebrations. Before that, there were numerous arrests of people arrested, so-called insulting the president. Sadly, under the Cybersecurity and Cyber Crimes Act of 2021, provisions that were in criminal defamation of the president were literally exported, and other offenses against speech. They are arrests against people who are speaking against government, issuing TikTok videos or just Facebook videos or going live. Rather than us, politicians, there are many ordinary people that are being arrested under those insult laws. What do you say to this?
It boils down to, and it comes back to the Constitution. The Constitution guarantees freedom of expression. Okay? Now, there are those, the law may say one thing. The problem is misapplication of the law. Okay? Yes, we're not saying that everybody that is on these platforms use them correctly. There will always be people that will abuse that. And then in the process, you need the law to enforce that. But the problem is the extent to which the law is being abused. Now, it will take you maybe 3-4 years to go through that trial. And you're not even sure because of who you are, you get convicted. Because really you committed a crime. Because first of all, the judiciary, the magistrates are already intimidated anyway. Okay? That's the problem. Even if you get acquitted, just that inconvenience for the number of months or years that you'll have to be shuttling between your place and the courts. You were telling me about how you had to wait for a magistrate from morning up to
at the end of the 17 hours.
Up to 17 hours. How do you have a court operate like that? You call for people to report 9 o'clock. You don't sit as a magistrate until 17 hours. I mean, how? Even as fellow human beings, how do you treat other people like that? Do you keep another human being waiting from 9 o'clock up to 17 hours? It's just inhumane. We're just terrible human beings. Okay? Our biggest problem is how we abuse power. Our mentality should be to say, let me treat other people the way I'd like to be treated if I thought I was on the other side of the fence. Okay? Always perceive yourself that today or tomorrow you also break the law. How would you like to be treated? Okay? But this is more of a moral issue, not so much of a legal issue. Yeah.
Let's migrate to another important issue in this country. The family silver, the mines. There were developments in for KCM. It was put under liquidation in 2018 because of the huge debt that previous investor Vedanta had accumulated. Mopani, Glencore decided on its own, I think, because of the issues they were facing in London and in the US courts, where they were being pursued for both tax evasion, corruption, and bribery, and other issues. They decided to decamp from their assets in Zambia, in Namibia, South Africa, and Australia. And they hammered a deal where the Zambian government were to take over absolute ownership through ZCMIH and pay through a debt of, with room of $1.5 billion. So when President Hakainde Hichilema comes into power, the major assets in this country, other than the ones owned by Barrick Gold and First Quantum in Northwestern Province, the major mining assets are in the hands of government. The decision to sell or give back to Vedanta, I think, was a contentious one. You saw the debate. Recently, Mopani was sold to a new investor from Dubai. Let me just give a brief background before I invite your comments. On KCM, President Hakainde Hichilema says we are not going to mine in courts. So he dropped the court cases. Similarly, under First Quantum, under Kansanshi, there were similar issues. So they dropped all those court cases and invited the investors to take full control. On KCM, there were issues of Vedanta, its viability, its standing currently internationally, and also its record of 20 years when it was here. On Mopani, an open process started. The Ministry of Mines announced through ZCMIH that they will hire a professional consultant, an international company, Rothschild was hired, and another legal company, another law firm, I think, is it Case and something, were hired to deal with the sale of Mopani. Although many Zambians didn't agree that we should sell at all, but the decision was made by government. They advertised. They listed by May 2023 10 bidders who had expressed interest. By July, government announced that they had whittled down the list to 4 prospecting investors that had shown interest. By October, they said we are final, we are on the last lap. And in January, and the 4 bidders were announced, by the way. There were 2 Chinese firms, a South African firm, and a group by former Glencore professionals and miners who had formed a vehicle of their own. But in January, we were surprised. President Hakainde Hichilema and the Minister of Mines announced that they had a new interested party in Mopani. And they introduced this company from Dubai, International Resource Holdings. They claimed that it was a company that was affiliated, a subsidiary of a bigger company that all of us know, International Holdings Company. It's a well-reputed, well-known company. But the link between it and this International Resource Holdings is not really seen or known. And within a few weeks, we saw the ZCMIH apply to the Osaka Stock Exchange that they had this deal they were dealing with. They for an extraordinary AGM, which approved the deal, sale of 51% shares of this International Resource Holdings. The other details are that this investor pledged to invest $1.1 billion. He says he will use out of that $1.1 billion, he will use $400 million to liquidate the debt of Glencore, which was 1.5. It had come down to around $600 million, and they say they got a discount. The remainder of the $600 million, the investors said it has to go to investment in the mines to ramp up production. I'm bringing out all this background for your answer on 2 issues. The stakeholders, the opposition, civil society, have said, looking at the history of our country and state-owned enterprises, where we had 325 companies and someone just sold them like that under a whiff of privatization. these remaining assets, the 33 assets, will require that you go to Parliament and get a 2/3 majority. I think that is provided for under Article 210. Number two, the other matter of concern is that the investor, for the transfer of these shares, the 51%, there is no money coming in the treasury. Because the investor is saying, give me 51% shares, but this $620 million for the 51% shareholding is not coming to you. It is going to the mines. So people are saying, then what have we done? What have we sold? Because when we sell or transfer shares, I should get something in the kitty. Bring fresh investment to invest in the mines. So those are the two current debates, especially on Mopani. We don't need to go to Parliament in accordance with Article 210, Sub-Article 2. And then the other issues, I leave the boat to you.
That's fine. There are two things, right? The three events prior to Delta taking over majority interest in Mopani is something I cannot comment on because I've not looked at the documentation. Okay, and sometimes it's not good to rely on unverified information. I prefer to look at the information myself and make my own judgment. But I'll say about Mopani, I'll say it in two forms. On paper, as it stands, it is a fantastic deal. That's one thing that we have to acknowledge. It is a very, very good deal. Better than KCM, better than possibly any other deal that has been struck. That's one aspect. But unfortunately, that transaction is illegal. It's unconstitutional. Now, you raised the important issues about how this funding has to be managed and everything else. And I remember my sister Nawakwi was saying that the revenue from the sale of the shares should have gone to Control 99 and so forth. The point is this, and she was trying to run parallels between the previous
privatization program of the 90s.
Of the 90s and this one. This is completely different. There are no parallels there. Okay, because what has happened then, all these assets were owned by directly government or ZCCM. So they were sold as assets. Okay, so therefore it was government selling and receiving the money. What you have now, all these assets, if we take Mopani, for example, it was sold initially to Glencore, right? Then Glencore sold it back to government. Okay, government has now sold it back to Delta. Now, these are different kind of transactions. Okay, so the treatment and how the revenue is treated is completely different. Let me just explain on one thing. If the deal goes through and it is implemented as set out on paper, yes, it will revitalize Mopani, okay, which will be good for the country. And also it is about making sure, the implication is that by virtue of holding 49% of the shares, it will also mean that government will be able to, government, of course, through all these other, through ZCCMHI, IDC, and ultimately will be able to get whatever profit is made, 49% of that profit will have to go to government, theoretically. But there are a number of factors to take into account. First of all, let me explain about how the shareholder, it was so painful to watch the Minister of Mines to explain exactly what does.
The Minister of Mines sparked, in fact, international debate. He insisted that there was no sale of Mopani, and he said the transfer of shares. I'm trying to circumvent that you've called an illegality. Article 210, Sub-Article 2. He says, no. It was just transfer of shares.
Whatever happened, the outcome is what is the end result. Okay, so the end result, whichever way you look at it, it results in an illegality. Okay, Now, yes, it is a fantastic deal, but that does not authorize you to override the Constitution. It still remains illegal, even if it is a very sweet deal, okay? But it's still. And in any case, somebody was saying, but who is responsible? The parties to the transaction are all responsible to comply with the Constitution, including Delta itself. When you come to do business in any country, you are obliged to respect the laws of that country, including the Constitution of that particular country. And Article 1 is very clear. Any act or omission that is inconsistent with the Constitution is null and void. Yeah. It's as simple as that. What makes it illegal? Let's go back to unbundle it. First of all, what has transpired? We must first of all acknowledge, if we wind it back, when Glencore was moving out, there was already a debt of well in excess of $4 billion in the form of shareholder loans into Mopani. This was a huge burden. Then PF government negotiated that to 1.5 billion, and they provided for a mechanism for the repayment of that, which would
that's very, very important.
Yes.
However, the exit of Bronco didn't make business sense.
No.
They had just invested, I think, in 2 new shafts.
Yes.
And that's a multi-billion-dollar investment.
That's right.
Just invested in a small town, I think, some form of refinery.
Yes.
So I think that's where you are talking about shareholder loans of up to $4 billion.
$4 billion.
So it's a well-invested asset.
It is. It is. So I think background information is always good. But unfortunately, we elected people who cannot even provide, who cannot digest these things and explain it to the people. So, okay, you have liability of 4 billion. It is reduced to 1.4 billion. Yeah. 1.5 is an attractive deal. And then they provided for repayment in the form of whatever
market rights.
Yeah, in terms of copper, that was going to be.
They took over the market rights.
That's right.
They would determine how much they could give you back.
That's
very
liquidate. As you liquidate now. But the problem is, they left Mopani broke. They only left, based on the sources that I've been able to establish, they only left $200,000 to run the mine when they were exiting. Now, how do you run a mine with $200,000? Okay, but I understand the management that remained there tried to gobble together some money to keep it running and so forth. But unfortunately, mining is an expensive venture. Okay, so what happened is that from the time they took off, government took over, Mopani has been operating at a loss. Okay, because it didn't.
So from 2020 to that,
it's been operating at a loss. And the loss has arisen from the fact that they have had no working capital. As a result, the debts have been going up. So what Mopani needed was cash injection in terms of working capital. So they now find, I'm not privy to all those people who did the bidding, but I'm just confining myself to the Delta deal. What is the structure of the Delta deal? The structure of the Delta deal is a good deal in the sense that as part of these negotiations, although the minister claimed that they paid off Glencore, that's not true. Okay, that's not correct. They didn't pay off Glencore, and that money didn't come from government. Out of the $1.4 billion that was agreed upon, they were able to negotiate with Glencore to bring their debt down from 1.4, because I think there was an attempt to service that loan. But I think they didn't make much dent into it. So they negotiated that debt from 1.4 to about $400 million. Okay, so already on the books of Mopani, that debt has shrunk. So what they've now done is that, by the way, for that $1.5 billion debt, all the assets of Mopani were mortgaged to Glencore.
Until the debt is cleared.
Until the debt is cleared. But with the new deal now, that debt of Glencore of 1.4 has been extinguished. Instead, Mopani now has a debt to Delta as a shareholder. So what has happened? Delta stepped in the shoes of Glencore, having paid Glencore 400 million. So they negotiated that. So the assets of Mopani, all the assets actually mortgaged to Delta.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
By the way, you can actually, I mean, again, we don't read. This information is available at Bakra, by the way. Okay.
Tell us.
Yes. Based on the printout from Bakra, it clearly shows, for example, that right now, if you look at, there's an entry which is which reads 1st October, 1st April,
Yeah.
2020, which
2024.
yeah, which no, 1st April 2021, there is this debt of 1.4 billion for Glencore. Now, if you check the Bakra record, it now says fully paid.
Wow.
When you now have Delta now, which have now registered their own mortgage, which was registered on 20th of March 2024, it is talking about almost 400 million, which is unpaid. That is one. That 400 million has come from that 1.4. So it's a good deal in the sense that you have extinguished a $1.4 billion debt to a $400 million.
But unfortunately, that means we've just transferred the asset from Glencore now they belong to Delta.
Now, all the assets now belong to, they are now mortgaged to Delta. But so for Mopani, the liability has come down to 400 million. By the way, Delta has already paid Glencore in full. Now, there's an interesting point. The question is, how can somebody accept to take a knock of
almost 1.1 billion?
1.1 billion. There is an agreement now involving Mopani and Glencore and the other parties where there is a royalty payment to be paid up to 2036. That is, in the event that the copper between now and 2036 is sold for $12,000
and above,
they'll get a royalty of 10%.
My God.
Okay.
So there's no discount.
No.
Glencore will appear for them up to 2036.
Up to 2036. So in a month, if you sell your copper, because right now it's at about what 8,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know what projection they have utilized. I have no idea. But they expect that it will reach $12,000 a ton, and if it reaches that markup, there's a trigger. They'll get 10% royalty.
The criticism reviews to government giving away both KCM and Mopani, whatever the challenges, is that projection shows that the price of copper is just going to rise and rise. It's at $9,000 already. Just from 3 years ago, it jumped from somewhere around 6,000 to 9,000 to 10,000. 12,000, we are not far away from it. In fact, the projections from what I read, that prices will go as soon as possible to $20,000 per ton.
It's possible. But
so that means there is a price sharing mechanism with Glencore,
yes.
2036.
To 2036. But the beauty is that you are looking at a dead mine, which is not mining anything. Okay? So you can have 100% of zero, and but nothing is happening in Mopani. Now they're injecting. So the projection is that they expect that, I don't know what the current output of Mopani is. It is expected that in the next 3 years, they'll be able to ramp up production of Mopani to about 200,000 metric ton per annum, which would be quite a significant revenue. On the remainder of the money, what has happened is that out of that 620 million, now there is also some other liability in between involving some third-party creditors whom I think they have paid out about 180 million. There is that liability. But what is the real money that has been injected into, that will be injected into Mopani? That will be $620 million. Now, out of that, like you have rightly put it, Mopani did a lot of investment in terms of developing mining areas and for develop. Now, what they did was these things were stopped halfway. Some of them were 80% complete, 70% complete. They have done the projections, which shows that it will take about $400 million to finish those projects and increase the production. So there is that $400 million which will now be invested. But that $400 million will not be readily available. It will be given out in tranches. Because you're talking about for mine development, you won't need it at once. But as and when it is required, money will be made available. Then there is $200 million. This is what is now required as working capital. That is how the deal is structured. Now,
the criticism that government coffers have received nothing.
Yes. Now, here's the point. The question is, how and why was the deal structured this way? The issue is very simple. Who needs the money? The entity that needs money is Mopani. So Mopani had to find, because government doesn't have the money to inject Mopani. Government is broke. Okay?
Correct.
So Mopani had to find another way of raising that capital for money required for working capital, and also to complete the projects. So Mopani now had to raise that money
by selling its shares.
That's right. So now let's go and let's backtrack a little bit. When Glencore walked away, government owned 100% of the shares of
Mopani.
Yes, of course, through ZCCMHI. But I'll use ZCCMHI interchangeably with government, because government is the ultimate beneficiary. It held 100% as a shareholder. Now, the point which is the government did not need money. Now, although it held that, by the way, Mopani in total has 200 million shares, okay, which its nominal capital is $200 million, which comprises 200 million shares divided of whose value is $1 each.
Okay.
Now, what they do, out of that 200 million, 6.9 million was issued to ZCCM. Okay? The rest were not issued. So, ZCCM held 100% of the issued share capital of Mopani. Now, those 9 million shares have remained with ZCCM-HI. Now, if Delta was to buy from that 6.9, then the money would have gone to ZCCM-HI. Okay? But ZCCM-HI didn't need the money. The entity that needs the money is Mopani. So therefore, for the 620 million, they said, okay, we want to have 51% of the shares of Mopani. We want to be the majority shareholder. So technically, Delta owns Mopani. Now, how do we achieve that? Two ways. They could have bought shares directly from ZCCM, but that would not have solved the problem. So what do? Remember, ZCCM is the only shareholder in Mopani. So ZCCM makes a decision to say Mopani should issue shares which will be equal to 51% of the issued share capital of Mopani. That is how Delta now ended up being given nearly 7.2 million shares. So ZCCM has 6.9 million and Delta has 7.2. This is how they structured it. Is it a sale or not? It is a sale. The only sale is between Delta and Mopani, in the sense that the money is going to Mopani because it is Mopani that needs the money. The technical word that is used in law is that Mopani allotted shares to Delta. It is to excel because for $620 million, Delta has received 7.2 million shares. It is sell. Okay, although the minister was trying to say it's not a sale.
You are trying to educate us. You don't know what a subscription means. You don't know what
money has changed hands. There's a contract.
Shares of
yes. I need the money, which is my consideration, which is you need shares. I need the money. Consideration, there's an offer and acceptance.
Yes,
Basic
that's a sale.
contract principle. You have the shares. The consideration for me as Mopani is shares. The consideration from you as Delta is cash. There's a transaction. Now, that is what the way it has been structured. Fantastic deal on paper. But it is important, before I move on to the legality of it, it is important that the key players keep an eye on this transaction to make sure that the parties act as expected. Because we have had experiences in the past whereby an investor comes in, promises to bring in money, and everything.
That's a good example.
Exactly.
It has signed $1.5 billion investment in KCM for 20 years.
Exactly. So, in this case, Mopani is in a healthier position than KCM, far much better. So we're talking about 400 million or so, and there is already, I understand, the 200 million, I think part of it has already been disbursed. By the way, it was actually disbursed by a local bank, Zanaco, anyway, the initial amount, of course, guaranteed by Delta. So
they bring in fresh money to you from your information, or they borrow from the local markets. I remember, for example, the sale of Zanaco from 51% shareholding, or was it 49? Where Rabobank from the Netherlands borrowed money from Interbank to pay for a transaction like this. So I hope that
I mean, that's not one and the same. The point is that a large chunk of the money which has been initially released came from Zanaco. Okay, so we don't know how they done it. It doesn't really matter how the money comes in. What is important is that money goes into Mopani. That is what is important.
Oh, it's important.
Yes.
If such an opportunity was given to local people,
yes,
where, for example, local bank lends to them on a mine. So we seem to open these doors to foreign entities who we respect more, and we can put an outlay of $400 million for them. That can never happen to a local person. So to some extent it is.
Yeah, but well, I
don't want to distract you.
As to whether government should be running businesses in the first place, I don't think that the government should be running businesses. Because the history of our parastatals clearly shows that government should not be running businesses. Okay. But anyway, coming back to the issue we're talking about, that is how it is structured. But ultimately, what is the effect? The effect is that we have transferred control or ownership of Mopani to Delta.
Both by shareholding and by assets, as you demonstrated.
That's what it means. So now let's remember, even before Glencore went out, right? ZCCM held about 10% of the shares. Right? So it was basically a minority shareholder. And at the end of the day, the person calling the shots was Glencore, not ZCCM. And even in this case, it is Delta calling the shots, not ZCCM HI, because they are 51%. Whether the moment you go into the mine, you lose 50%. 50% of the shares are handed over to another entity. You have lost control. Okay, so there is a transfer. In any case, all those people that are talking about whether it was a sale or what, the Constitution talks also about a transfer.
Let's come to the issue of the Constitution. So, how is this transaction? You've demonstrated it is sweet, it's needed, it might revitalize the copper belt.
Yes.
And good governance. They didn't follow the
is illegal in the sense that, you see, when you look at Article 120, 110, now, again, like many other provisions in the Constitution, they have a background. Okay. Now, the issue of constitutionalizing the disposal of government assets started with the Mungomba Constitution Commission. Now, by that time, we had already gone into we had 15 years of privatization, and the results were horrendous in terms of how the entire process was done. So when it came up before the Constitution Commission, this issue was raised. Those that are interested can go and look at pages 721 of the Mungomba Constitutional Commission report, which was released in June of 2005. If you may indulge me, let me just read what it says. It says here, the commission, this is the Constitution Commission, says, observes that the need for privatization gained momentum in the 1980s following the widespread disappointment with the general performance of state-owned enterprises. The Commission notes that most developing countries which had enthusiastically embraced state-owned enterprises reported less than satisfactory experiences with them. State-owned companies failed to perform for a variety of reasons, including application of inappropriate technology, dependence on processing of imported raw materials, inexperienced management, misappropriation of resources by officials appointed by governments to run them. I'm sure that disease should even be worse today now. Okay? These are the reasons why, when we are talking about this Zambian experience and so forth, and operation in monopolistic environments with no competition. The implication of this was that state-owned enterprises were typically potentially inefficient. This affected their financial viability, which in turn required that government subsidizes their operations. Thus, many countries saw privatization as a cure for public sector deficits. The Commission also observed that as an economic policy, privatization is not unique to Zambia, as many developing countries struggling to activate their battered and declining economies have either voluntarily or been forced to turn to privatization as a key economic policy for bringing about dynamic and sustainable. Let me jump here. Let's say, Commission notes that in Zambia, most of the privatized companies were sold cheaply as the program was rushed and no accurate assessment of the values of these companies was undertaken. Much as it was well intended, privatization has had a negative social impact. It has resulted in the sale of most state-owned companies to mainly foreign buyers who have been unwilling to take on board most of the former employees of the enterprises which were sold. This has led to entrenchment, redundancies, and consequently massive unemployment in the country. Then they give the figures about how the labor force shrunk. And then they come to the case. In the case of Zambia Consolidated Copper Mines, some of the new owners failed to sustain the mining operations and opted to abandon the mines, or were forced to leave, leading to serious disruptions and distortions in the economy. And this has continued. Okay, we had the experience of Anglo, we just worked out. Okay, so we have Glencore, which pulled out. So they now came. Some of the foreign investors who purchased state-owned enterprises were only interested in asset stripping. So we have a long history of these things. So these things don't just come from thin air. They're born out of history. And this is what the Commission said. In the light of the above consideration, the Commission agrees that government should seek the approval of Parliament, okay, before the sale, transfer, or disposal of major assets, including parastatal companies. In this regard, the Commission feels that it is government's obligation to provide certain services, such as they're talking about, to provide certain services such as energy, communication, banking, health, to mention but a few to the public, which would otherwise not be provided if the company is currently providing such services in private hands. So there's a suggestion that a line of certain economic activities should be undertaken by government. This is the recommendation. The commission, this is 2005 we're talking about.
Yeah.
The commission recommends that the constitution should provide that any measure to sell, transfer, or dispose of major public assets such as parastatos shall require approval of the National Assembly through a resolution supported by not less than 2/3 of the MPs.
Wow. This is 2005. Gambians are concerned. And they're saying any sale of any assets, transfer of shares, whatever, go back to Parliament.
Go back to Parliament, whatever happens. Then, when the President Sata appointed a technical committee, the technical committee also came up with the same conclusion. Now, in the Mungomba Constitution Commission, they introduced the Article 315 in the draft constitution, which says any major asset, such as a parastatal company or a commercial enterprise of the state, shall not be sold or transferred or disposed of except with a prior resolution of the National Assembly supported by a vote of not less than 2/3 of all the members of the National Assembly.
The Mopani sale falls in this category.
It falls in this category because what has happened is this. Government owns this entity 100%. What has happened? It has transferred that. Okay? That company is technically owned by another company. Okay? What is the difference between 49% and 10%? There's no difference. You're still a minority shareholder anyway. Okay? The one with 51% controls. And in fact, that is exactly what is happening on the ground anyway in Mopani. And if you go find out further, you will actually discover that, in fact, there is actually a parallel management which has been introduced, Mopani. Whereas you have the existing management, Delta has brought
it's on people who own the assets now.
Exactly. But obviously they are concerned. So a deal like this required government approval of the National Assembly. There is another point which people seem to ignore, which is the fact that, you see, when you have a license, okay, there is a provision under the Mines and Minerals Development Act, right? First, when you have a license, the way Mopani has, you cannot undertake any reorganization internally which will result in a new person having more than 50% of the shares without a ministerial approval. Okay? This is contained in Section 67 of the Mines and Minerals Development Act. It says, a holder of a mining right or mineral processing license shall not, after the date of the grant of the license, without the prior written approval of the minister, register the transfer of any shares or of any share or shares in the company to any person or that person nominee, if the effect of doing so will give that person control of the company.
So the shares can't be sold without approval of the ministry.
This, Kabuswe, granted this permission. Why? Because they recognize that there is now a transfer. A new person is going to control this mine. ZCCM was going to lose control over Mopani. This particular provision was complied with. Okay? Or there's another scenario, or into an agreement with any person if the effect of doing so would give the person control. What is control? It says here, for purposes of this section, a person is deemed to have control of a company if that person or that person's nominee or either person or that person's nominee together have a total of 50% or more of the equity shares of the company.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't say
council, the law, state council, the law is very clear.
The law is clear.
You need minister's approval.
Yes, maybe
but you need 2/3 majority in Parliament.
Yes.
You can't bypass that.
You can't bypass, and the rationale is very simple. That is why, for example, we have too many questions about this transaction. Okay? There were other people, for example, that you have referred to. Now, members of parliament needed to understand, how did you end up with Delta?
Yeah, why have you abandoned Sibanya Water and these others?
Yes.
Where has international resource holdings, which now register Delta, come from? Constitutes this local Delta. There's a local shareholder. Who are they?
Who are they? And all these things is designed for purposes of transparency.
Yeah.
Okay? So that, because at the end of the day, look at this saga with KCM. We're suffering. The Zambians that are suffering. Okay? Now, these assets are supposed to benefit the people. And the best way to do it is to say, what is the rationale behind taking the issue to the National Assembly? Because this is where the people's representatives, MPs, represent the people in their respective constituencies. And you would have expected the MPs on the Copper Belt and Northwestern Province to lead the matter to be part of this discussion, because these mines exist in their constituencies, so that they have an input, so that they know how Delta has ended up being the selected entity to take
successful bidder.
All these things, you know what? They are necessary for purposes of. It could be that this is a clean deal. We don't know that. Okay? But also, don't
forget. Council. In fact, this brings me to this question. Every time we raise these concerns, in the manner you've expressed them, and you've expressed them in a more lucid manner than many of us, I think, have done, the concerns around the Constitution. Is this illegality very serious? Part of the Constitution. Is it an infraction we can ignore because the deal is good?
No, you can't. You see, here is a problem. If I may just, if the Article 210, it says, subject to approval. It's not ratification, but approval. So before you complete this deal, they have to approve. You need to have approval of the National Assembly. Okay? Now, it's only when you have approval, that's when you complete. It's different from ratification. Ratification you can conclude.
And it just comes later.
Okay?
In this case, it's approval.
It's approval. You have to do it. These are what we would call condition precedents. You should have obtained parliamentary approval before concluding this deal.
Okay.
Now, there is a constitutional omission. Now, Article 1 clearly says that any act or omission that contravenes the Constitution, that act, it says, if I may just read it expressly, it says, Article 1(2) says, an act or omission that contravenes this Constitution is illegal. Full stop. No matter how sweet the deal is, no matter how much it favors the people of Equal and Venezuela, it is illegal. Now, there is a problem with this. Delta should have ensured that before they concluded, comply with the constitutional provision.
Will the sort risk taken over by government because of this provision?
Ambassador, yes.
If you got a new government, for example,
yes, they can say this is an illegal contract. Okay. Now, the reason why there is always need, even if you are in doubt, wisdom will dictate to say, you know what, let's err on the side of caution. Let's go to National Assembly. You have no problem. Okay? It's better to do that.
These are malicious.
No, they would not have refused.
Yeah.
Nobody can tank a deal like this. It's a fantastic deal. What is beyond comprehension is why they didn't take it to the National Assembly. And even when you ask them to explain, for some reason, they can't even explain it. What is even worse, the Attorney General is asked, they said, this deal is illegal. He says, no, it's not illegal. It's okay. But if you have a problem, go to court. No, that is again not understanding your role as an Attorney General. An Attorney General, you are not a cadre. You are Attorney General for the Republic of Zambia. What the Attorney General needed to do was to explain why, in his opinion, there was no requirement to take the issue to the National Assembly. We could have had a debate on that.
And we have heard from what the minister has been saying. He says, no, this is a subscription, it's share subscription, it's just mere transfer. to circumvent the provisions of the law.
Yeah, but even then, that is unsuccessful because Article 2.10 is very broad.
Yeah.
It's very, very broad. It simply says, even if you are talking about a transfer, you have, okay, fine, there's no subscription or whatever, but you've transferred the asset.
And background documents show the ownership has changed.
Exactly.
Voter today can sell these assets.
Exactly. Because all the assets are mortgaged anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So all these things, in any case, what was so different? What would they have lost if I thought they had gone to yes, because we will no doubt revamp T20 Muslims. To no doubt revamp. But we just, I mean, here's the situation. Before 2016, we went to court. The court ruled that President Lungu is eligible. Right? It's happened. There's a change of government. The matter is back in court.
So this deal risks
exactly that is the problem. Okay, the next government will say, listen, we are constitutionalists. We are for rule of law. This deal did not meet
the requirement of the law.
And they can go to court and unbundle it to say, okay, this is an illegal contract. And then you start unraveling it. Okay, so it was incumbent upon parties. These are the things that you tick.
The presidential jet bought at $120 million, refurbished with technical specs, it went to almost $200 million. Is it a major national asset? Because we understand the person has refused to use that plane. He's put it on the line that he's selling it. Does it fall in the realm of a major national asset?
It does. It's an asset. If you go to the document saying ownership, whose name appears there?
Yeah.
JRZ.
Yeah, Sagwa Air Force, yes.
Okay, so you cannot sell it the way you would sell your own car. Okay? And also, the point is that there is a misconception about the president and on the part of the president over the jet.
Yeah.
The jet belongs to the Republic.
It's a national asset.
It's a national asset. Whether you like it or you don't like it, it's an asset of the Republic. You have no right to sell it. Okay? You can decide not to use it. That's your choice. But you can't sell it. You cannot therefore say, well, I don't like it. What? It's already been paid for anyway. But in any case, it would even be irresponsible to sell it because you cannot recover the kind of money that you spent.
Yeah.
Logic, if somebody is really financially disciplined, common sense will say use it. Because that jet that they are using is an older 50-year-old jet. So I don't know what the cost of maintenance is and so forth. That is a more modern, I mean, we're talking about what is a gap of 30 years? The Challenger was bought when? In maybe 20?
No, it's a little 50-year-old.
Yes.
By the time we bought it was 30 years ago.
That's right. Now, can you imagine how technology has improved in the last 50 years? Okay. So obviously, the newer plane, the Gulfstream, is a 600, is a far more efficient jet. Now, if you are really conscious, I mean, you are president of a country that is bankrupt, why would you refuse to use an asset that has already been paid for?
Yeah.
Yes, you may have issues. The issue is not the plane. The issue is what you think was paid for, which you believe is exorbitant.
Can do with that separately.
With that, yes, it has nothing to do with the asset. If you believe that, well, you should have paid $50 million, but you guys, you took the top soup and you what is the term for it? Something was just
Let me check it out.
It was too much. To follow those who got to that something. There's nothing wrong with a jet. There's nothing wrong. The problem is that if you have evidence to say other people profiteered from the transaction, you follow those and recover the money. But the solution is not to sell the asset. That would be irresponsible to do that. Yeah.
Council, I think thank you for the clarification. Do you have any comments about KCM? I see you've dealt comprehensively with the latest issue of Mopani.
Yes.
I think you've directed both the public and the country on the state of Mopani, a good deal, sadly an illegal deal.
That's right.
And there's no cure other than parliamentary approval.
That's right. Which they can still do. They have,
in retrospect.
Yes. They have to find a way. I mean, if you put together, I mean, they are very expensive lawyers. and I'm sure they can find a solution to make sure that they comply with the Zambian constitution.
Yeah.
It is imperative that they comply with it. Okay? Remember what happened to Lab Green when Mr. Sata took office?
Yes, he just
Samtel.
he just took over it.
Yeah.
He says the deal was illegal. It would meet the compliance issues.
Exactly.
Took over.
But here we are talking about violation of the constitution, which is even far greater infraction. Okay? You can't sacrifice because the deal is good. Therefore, you say, well, it makes commercial sense. It doesn't give you license to violate the constitution. Okay, even if it is, no matter how good it is, you still have to comply with the law. And that's why when you listen to these guys to say we are for rule of law, rule of law means respecting the law even when it is inconvenient. It's not about circumventing the law. If the law says you go to the National Assembly, you go to the National Assembly. And you now have the task to convince the other opposition members why this deal is okay. The
president has given us some set of mindset. It seems to be frustrated by bureaucratic procedures and constitutional requirements like this. He has expressed disdain of procedures. He wants the end result. Does this justify the end?
It doesn't. I mean, if let's say you don't have that patience to respect the law, then you shouldn't be in government. Okay, you should be in the private sector. But even in the private sector, there is also things like governance. And that is why, for example, we have a problem where the president gives instruction to Cisco managing director, do this ABC. That's lawlessness. Okay?
Employee messes.
You can't, that's lawlessness. You can't. Okay? The only people that can give instruction to ZESCO MD is the board of ZESCO. Okay, the president cannot override the board. And these are the problems that we have in our parastatals, and these problems, they continue. Even people that claim to know, you have been stand-up businessmen. I mean, it's very basic about how companies should operate.
On London, the president came from Dubai and he says, is it true when he came from Qatar, he said, I've come along with investors and he summoned, management of Zesto. Investors were on the left and he chaired the meeting and directed that they should ensure that the agreements are completed. The share purchase agreement is signed. That's lawless. That's cleared for the MD. I suppose him and his management is going to refuse. If, for example, this investor would say, we'll sell you power when we set up this solar plant. We'll sell you at 18 cents. You refuse.
Yes.
If the president does
That's right, directed. Right. So the president should never get involved into these things. Okay. I mean, there are always rules. Even if you talk about companies like Zesco are still limited liability companies, and they are governed by the provisions of the Companies Act. There are rules to follow, even if you are president. But these are problems that follow you once you leave office, unfortunately. But the rules are there. You choose to break them at your own peril. Okay. So these are the challenges. Our biggest problem as Zambia is basically, I think we are just a lawless people. The rules are very clear. If we settle for what the rules follow, maybe half of our problems will be over. You see, it's a typical situation. If you have a small contender, you employ somebody, you tell him to say, okay, this is where you record the sales. The moment you see the guy stops recording, he's a thief. What is he doing? He's breaking the controls. And then create confusion because you can't steal if systems are working. Systems are broken deliberately so that people can steal. So rule of law does not favor thieves. It doesn't, unfortunately. So when you find people resisting to follow the law, there is a problem.
This government doesn't on large-scale tender processes, whether it's fertilizer or any large procurement, opted for, mechanisms that actually just favor them. Direct bidding. There's a lot of lawlessness going on.
KCM.
Do you have any thoughts on
KCM is a fiction. Okay, whatever I know matters are in court, but I have my misgivings. I don't think at all in its current state KCM will ever come to life. I doubt it. And whatever people are trying to cook, it is really a fiction. I know there are attempts to enter into what they call scheme of arrangement with creditors and But
what does that mean, scheme of creditors? What debt is on KCM? You appear to put a nail to its coffin, like it won't come up. Because it's a company with some of the largest copper deposits in the world, the one under Concola Deep.
It does, but you need money to be able to realize those things. Let me say this. I know President Lungu made many mistakes, but if there is the worst mistake of his presidency was the decision to take over KCM. I know people don't want to hear this. That's the true position. The manner in which this was taken. Okay. First of all, it was illegal. It was illegal. I know people have said bad things about Vedanta and everything else. Yes, they may not have been following the law, but you cannot break the law. Cure another wrong. Okay. Even the way it was, first of all, I grew up on the copper belt, and I followed the privatization. Mining is not an easy business to carry out. And as you have seen from the report of the Mungomba Constitution Commission, parastatals failed because of the ineptitude, blatant theft by people that were running it. Now, you go and take a major asset like KCM, which requires huge amounts to run. Okay? Now, I don't believe government has capacity to run a business. I don't. And I don't believe that there should even be entities like IDC. Okay, I believe all the entities under IDC should simply be privatized. Okay, because I don't believe that government has a role to play in business.
Of business in business.
Yes, like Dr. Chiluba you used to say, government has no business in business. We have that experience of parastatals. They failed and they ran down this country. Now, coming to more specifically to KCM, yes, there were wrongs done. But why were the wrongs done by Vedanta? It's very simple. We did not enforce the laws. Our biggest problem is the inability to enforce the laws.
We advise on Mopani, yes, that these proposals by the investor that will bring $620 million or $400 million must be followed.
It must be followed. That's what I'm saying. The paper looks good. The deal looks good on paper. We have to follow it up. Okay? Now, these are the problems because, again, instead of following up, our people get bribed and then we'll forget about it. Now, that should not be the case. We should be open for business to foreign investors, but they must respect our laws. They must follow
agreements as well.
Yes, when there is an agreement, they should follow that agreement. Now, KCM was in a bad state. But what has happened is that I would apportion the blame to both the PF government and the UPND government. Now, why do I say so? The reason is very simple. President Lungu should not have taken over KCM in the first place. And that fiction of putting up a liquidator was a fiction. That was a clear illegality. You cannot put a liquidator under those circumstances. Okay? And secondly, even the way it was done, when you apply for liquidation, first of all, there was no cause to put in a provisional liquidator. There was no cause. Because that is, again, a problem that was created by the courts, because there was no justification to put in a provisional liquidator. If I thought there was no provisional liquidator, the history of KCM would have been totally different. Now, when you have a provisional liquidator, your job is to kill the company.
As a liquidator?
Yes. It's not to run it. That's your job. You are liquidating. You are killing it.
You are killing
yes,
it.
You are killing it. Because the argument initially by ZCCM was that, well, we can't get along, and then later on they changed that and said, well, you are insolvent. And if you are insolvent, that is the reason for you to go out of business. Insolvency means you're not able to meet your liabilities as and when they fall due. So you can't be allowed to trade. Okay? So you have to be put down. Now, what happened to the liquidator? He started trading. What should have happened is there should have been no mining, no smelting, nothing. There should have been no activity whatsoever at KCM. The only thing that should have been there is simply to protect the asset until you find a buyer for it. Okay? But what happened? The liquidator started trading. It's never the job of a liquidator to trade. It is the job of a receiver, not the job of a liquidator. Liquidator is to liquidate, is to kill. What happened? Mopani's financial position worsened during the period. Ambassador, I'm sorry to say this, all those people that were involved in the Mopani transaction, I look at them as enemies of this country. They were KCM. KCM, all those people involved in KCM were all enemies of the state because whatever they did was simply terrible. First of all, the liquidator is never paid based on the revenue that is being generated because he shouldn't be trading. He gets paid when he sells the asset. All those, I know the agreements that were signed, all those agreements are illegal. They are all illegal. Ordinarily, if we're really serious, all those people involved in the KCM saga should all be in jail because the damage they have done to this country is incalculable. Because what happened, even though the liquidator was trading, do you know that he couldn't even maintain to meet his obligations? Government had to pump in more money into KCM. I mean, where, on what planet is that even feasible? Okay, but what has happened?
Your money goes to PF and UPND.
Yes,
or come to UPND.
That is the problem. So that should not have happened.
Yeah.
UPND, when you look at the liability of KCM in 2021,
or 2021,
it is not what it is today. The blame for UPND is time they have taken to resolve this issue. In fact, it's not even resolved.
But in the meantime, has the liquidator also proceeded to trade?
It's still the same illegality going on. Okay? So in the meantime, the financial position of KCM is worse. Okay? Now, by some estimates, you're talking about liabilities of this account confirmed by from third-party sources. I've not confirmed this, but some people, by some accounts, they're saying the liabilities of KCM are well in excess of $2 billion plus. Before you even start operations, this is just Mpongole. Right? Now, you need to inject more money now to finish all those shafts to start operation. Again, it is estimated that another maybe $1 or $2 billion. We're talking about something like maybe $3-4 billion. With $3-5 billion, I'll go and start another mine.
A new mine.
Yes. Now, who are the major creditors? You have your ZRA, you have your ZESCO, you have your CUC, you have NAPSA, and so forth.
And then our suppliers and contractors.
That's right. But the suppliers are a small portion. Okay? So what is, I don't believe.
Dr. Sishua issued a public statement. He said he had gotten window of an argument by the CMIH and Vedanta. And he said, from his estimation, that deal, that agreement of handing over back, KCM to Vedanta was criminal. He said, similar words you've used, that whoever is involved in this has actually committed treason. He then challenged the Minister of Mines and Minerals Development, Honorable Pokabu. So he said, if I am lying, if my source is not credible, publish the agreement you have just signed between the CMIH and Vedanta.
Yeah.
My allegation that you have sold the country. We We have joined in demanding that that agreement be signed, but we seem to have repeated the mistakes.
Yes.
And again, we've not even signed a worse-off deal. I don't know what is contained in that deal.
Nobody knows. And that is why when you have this, and I think comes to when you elect people don't really understand their role. Okay? When you're a minister, you work for the people. If the people demand this, you make it available. You don't hide. Because this is public information. If you have nothing to hide, then why can't you disclose it? But remember, like we are saying, we are suffering from the ramification of whatever these government officials' decisions which they make. Now, where can this information be made publicly available? Okay, nobody has seen that transaction. And all what we have now, you now have somebody cooking up some, I know the matter is in because somebody's cooking up some scheme of arrangement. Even the scheme of arrangement, there is no provision in the law for a legal writer for a scheme of arrangement with creditors. There's no such a provision.
It is provided for.
What is provided for? First of all, you do not put a company under the control of a liquidator. His mandate is very simple. Wait. Okay, very simple. You stay in the Corporate Insolvency Act. And there is no provision. Your mandate, you don't have that mandate. The scheme of arrangement can be done by the company itself. Okay?
By a city manager.
No, by the creditor or a member of the company. Okay? It's okay, fine. Can we enter into a deal with the other creditor so that we see how we can pay them out? Now, in this case, technically, that company, KCM, is actually abusing the shield of liquidation to keep away the creditors, because there are people holding judgments against KCM. The moment the liquidators out, they bounce. That is abuse. That is not what liquidation is intended for. It is intended for it's an orderly way for you to exit, stop existing. It is not meant to revive you. Okay? So that is where the problem is. The foundation is illegal, and whatever has been done subsequently is still illegal. That is why I have my misgivings about its viability. And in my opinion, having known that what was done by the PF government was illegal, at the very least, I expected UPND to resolve this issue within maybe 3 to 6 months after coming to power. By that time, the burden of KCM was less. Because remember, this thing is going every day, growing.
Oh, you have to pump water out. You have to pump out.
And you're not paying. Okay? Maybe then, that's your timing is very important in business. Okay? And even these guys who claim to know business, they should know that. So that is where my misgivings come from. But overall, between the two deals, Mopani is a far much better deal, save for the illegality.
Yeah. Yeah.
But KCM is also another illegal transaction that is being told as a successful deal. It's not. And these are the consequences of not respecting the law. The law is very clear. Stick to the law. You'll be safe.
Yeah.
And when you don't stick to the law, the consequences to the country are enormous. And this is what we are suffering from.
Oh, good. Before I let you go, there's an issue of governance. The Minister of Home Affairs held a press conference. You were talking about the United Kwacha Alliance. He said it's illegal. It's an illegal entity, as called it, and literally it should not exist. I want to solicit for your opinion. You might not have prepared on this, but I would like you to think on top of your head. Are these statements, public statements against governance, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly? Okay. Does a political alliance require even registration? What does the law say?
Ambassador, we have a law, which is in the Constitution. It provides for freedom of assembly and association. We can assemble under any umbrella. Nowhere does it say you need, for you to come in as an alliance, you need to be registered. There is no such a requirement. But there's a requirement for political parties to be registered. Okay? But if we band the three of us to say we are forming an alliance, there is no requirement under the law to say we should be registered. Okay? So, but the overriding concern is that the three of us, we have met the requirements under the Societies Act because we are a registered political party. But there is no law which says that an alliance should be registered. I do know that there is a provision under the proposed Political Parties Act where an alliance is required to be registered. But that law, to the best of my recollection, that is simply proposed. It's in a bill. It's not yet law. Okay. So, but if that act comes into place, it means that all the political parties registered under the Societies Act will be deemed to have been registered under the Political Parties, and then they'll be able to follow that. Now, people don't really understand this. As a citizen, I have the right to do everything that I can think of. You cannot, or unless the law stops me from doing it. But as government, you cannot do anything unless you're empowered by law to do something. It's the converse. That is why we have laws. So the law must stop me. If it doesn't stop me, then it means I have the freedom to do that. There is no law which says that an alliance must be registered. Okay, there isn't. Okay, and in any case, how can something be an illegal entity? Okay, how do you become an entity? You become an entity because you are registered under some law. So if I'm not registered under some law, it means I'm not an entity. Therefore, I cannot be illegal because it don't exist at law. You know, these are some of the problems that people should be able, even ministers. I mean, I have a rule. Never open your mouth unless you have checked the law. You see?
Even you who's a lawyer.
That's why, Ambassador, you never catch me. I can never say something. That's why I brought all these things so that I don't rely on my memory. Once I misspeak or whatever, I mislead myself. I bring the documents that I think can guide me. Very simple, because that is not what I think it should be. It is what is on the paper. So if the minister says it's an illegal entity, it's not an entity. What makes it an entity? Okay. For example, for companies, they are registered under the Companies Act. So political parties under the Societies Act. So if you are not registered under any of these instruments, you're not an entity. Okay, so you can't declare something to be an illegal entity which does not exist.
The UPND alliance itself,
yes,
an alliance, is it registered?
It's not registered.
It even needs to.
Yes. For example, it's like you and I. Let's say we come together to say, you know what? Let's work out something to put our own interest. As long as we don't purport that this is a legal entity, okay. Okay. Nobody has suggested that UKA, or is it UKWA or UKA, is a legal entity. Nobody has ever said that. Okay, and we all know UKA has never been registered. Therefore, it is not a legal entity. So how can it be described as an illegal entity? You know, so if it is not an entity, therefore it cannot be expected to comply with the provisions of the law. I think what is required in this case is the individual political parties possibly to inform the police. Again, the Ambassador, I was reluctant to comment about this because I don't know what these people in UKA have actually done.
Yeah, true.
Okay, but there's a requirement if you're going to come together as political parties to inform the police.
So they did actually inform the police. They gave a notice under their individual political parties. I'm aware that
is enough.
And government parties that submitted the request.
That is enough.
These are registered entities.
Yes, and they're entitled. And don't forget, we have an overriding provision in the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, which guarantees each and every one of us freedom of assembly and association. Okay, we can assemble as individuals. We can also assemble as political parties. Nothing stops us from doing that, and it is then the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Ambassador, if our colleagues in Oasis Forum have the money.
Yeah.
I think they should carry out.
What to do?
No, they have to create. I think they have to carry out civic education for all cabinet ministers.
They should start with
Including the president, by the way.
Yeah.
Give them civic education and a bit of training on what the Constitution provides.
Yeah.
I think that is what is needed.
And I propose they hire you as a resource.
Energetic. So that is what we need to do. This country's primary requirement, Ambassador, is let's stick to the law.
Yeah.
Let's respect the law.
In fact, Council, I am looking forward to inviting you. We are celebrating, is it Diamond Jubilee?
Yes, 60 years.
What have we done wrong? What could we have done better?
Yes.
And as we march towards the next 60 years, I want you and us to come and have a discussion. What's wrong with our country?
Yeah.
Because we seem to be proposing solutions to problems we've not even identified.
That's exactly the
So I hope that you will find.
I think it is an important historical event. Because what has happened is that we have basically atrophied as a country. We were one of the richest countries at independence. We have morphed into the poorest country in Africa, in the world. How do you explain that in 60 years? Okay, that is a tragedy. And that is what is required. So we shouldn't actually be celebrating. We have nothing to celebrate. We should use this as a time of reflection.
Sacred reflection.
Okay? For us to understand what have we gotten wrong in the last 60 years. Okay? Because what are you going to celebrate? Drought, road shedding, unemployment,
disease,
corruption. What is that to celebrate? What is there? And then you have just had your debt restructured because you can't.
You've merely suspended the payment from today to a future date.
Yes. But what is there to celebrate? What is there to celebrate?
So
unemployment is the highest it has ever been. We can't even, I mean, what we have spent, I'm not trying to preempt what your planned discussion. I think our biggest problem is we are trying to address the symptoms and not the problems. When we look at the issue, we just had a cholera. People lost their family members. Cholera is not a problem. It's a symptom of a problem. The exchange rate, the way it is going up like a yo-yo, it's not a problem. It is a symptom of a problem. The drought that we're experiencing is not, and the fact that there is now a potential starvation, it's not a problem. It is a symptom of a problem. Load shedding is not a problem. All these things that we're talking about, Ambassador, they're not problems. They are symptoms. Okay? So I hope we'll be able to spend time to reflect what is the real cause. Until and unless we identify the real cause, we're just going to spend another 60 years. You and I will no longer be there with leaving our children and our children's children to live in abject poverty. For instance, there is now this course where we are saying President HH has failed, right? I would put my hand up and say, it failed. You have to go beyond that. Let's not just, first of all, failure of any president should not be celebrated.
It's a collective failure.
It's a collective failure. Which means that as a people, we made a bad choice. But in any case, when we fail, we are facing the consequences of that failure. The 20 million Zambians are suffering, are paying for the consequences of that failure. So we shouldn't celebrate that. We shouldn't celebrate the fact that HH has failed to run this country. What we should go beyond acknowledging the fact that he has failed. We should now begin to interrogate and ask ourselves, why has he failed? Which we don't do. Okay? We kicked out Lungu. It's okay, Lungu has failed. But we pause for a moment. Why did Lungu fail? Because if we had done that interrogation, perhaps the outcome of the election would have been different. Now, let's seize this opportunity before 2026 to interrogate and understand why has the church failed, so that we make sure that we put safeguards for the next election, for the next president that is likely to be elected, so that it doesn't make the mistakes that the church has made.
Yeah, you are a ripe candidate for my reflection. I want to have various conversations on Diamond Jubilee, of 60 years. I think that the Diamond anniversary requires this moment of reflection. I also hold the view that celebrations like we do, we turn serious sacred issues into events.
Yeah.
It will pass.
Yes.
We put up banners, the banner will play, we'll say we are 60 years, we are happy 60 years, and we walk our way back to the same point.
What are you celebrating, Ambassador?
Yeah.
You should celebrate some milestones that you have achieved.
Yeah.
What have you achieved? Are you able to name one sector, one aspect of this country which is performing?
No,
Is there any sector that is healthy in this country? Nothing. Everything is dead. Okay. So what is there to celebrate? If there is any money to be spent on those so-called celebrations, I would advise you don't even spend that kind of money, because you don't even have the money anyway, because you are broke. Okay. That is why even the idea of saying, oh, let's have a new roadmap, it's crazy. Let's have priorities. We should be able to reflect. Why are we where we are after 60 years of independence?
Yeah.
We must have, so that when we enter into the 2025, we must have an answer to that question.
Yeah. Wonderful. To my dear viewers, we were privileged to host Mr. John Sagwa, State Counsel, a renowned lawyer in this country, constitutional lawyer, academic lecturer, and public commentator on various issues, and is a voice of light, voice of guidance for our country. And that's why he came. He speaks candidly as it is. So my role is just to thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Sagwa, and thank you for sparing this time once again.
Ambassador, it's always my privilege, because I hold the Constitution very dear to my heart. So whenever I have an opportunity to talk about these things, I don't miss that opportunity. So I think the privilege is also mine that you've accorded me this platform.
Thank you very much. You directed that the booklet should be distributed to every school, to every public place of our Constitution.
Yes.
That's how important a guide and light it is to our country. But we don't take it as such.
Don't take it. We don't. I mean, even the curriculum, they should, maybe part of the reflection of the 60 years is to see how do we inculcate the constitutional values into the younger generation. The older generation, they lost scores anyway, so those are already damaged anyway. But for the younger ones coming, I think we have to reflect on the curriculum to make sure that we instill this sense of pride in the Constitution. They should have a sense of ownership of this Constitution and accept its sacredness, because it provides the foundation of who we are. Okay, so I hope we'll reach there, Ambassador. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've promised you, State Council will be back on the reflection of the 60 years. I will accord him time to prepare and reflect. When he comes here, he comes loaded with a bazooka like he did today. So until next time, and until we have another special guest, God bless Zambia. God bless our country. God bless you. Shalom, shalom.